Let's talk housing. Affordability is improving in Canada, but if you want to live in Toronto and Vancouver, average homes still far out of reach for the average family. Hogue is a senior economist at RBC and joins us now with the details. Good to see you, Robert.
Well, good afternoon, Greg.
So this is your regularly, I believe it's quarterly report on housing affordability. We know there's been a great cool down in Canadian real estate, so of course the numbers look a little more favorable. But as we said, the average person still out of luck in the big city.
Oh yes, I mean definitely we're going to cheer on the little bit of improvement in affordability we can get, but let's not fool ourselves here. And affordability is still very stretched in the larger markets in Toronto and Vancouver, and including also in Victoria. And things are getting a little bit stretched in Montreal and Ottawa, but nowhere as much as the previous three cities there.
Now, obviously, part of this equation is what we Canadians are making, and I imagine it would take a lot of progress on the wage gain front to start making a dent in the big cities. But are we seeing our wages move higher?
They are, but I mean, we would need, as you just pointed out, we would need a significantly larger wage gains or income gains to really make housing more affordable. But at this point, when you look outside of Toronto, Vancouver, and Victoria, affordability is not that bad. Like as I pointed out, Montreal and Ottawa are getting a little bit stretched, but for the vast majority of other markets, in our report we highlight that there's more than 50% of families that could afford to own a home at today's prices. And even more, close to 2/3 in if they were looking at buying a condo, which is obviously a cheaper housing option. So really, the big picture is improving a little bit, but continues to be its story. The unaffordability story in Canada is really concentrated in three major cities.
What about the idea that around these major cities you would drive until you could afford a home, and then you might have an hour commute into the city to go to work, but people live with that. I live with that. Does that exist anywhere outside of the big cities, or when we talk about affordable options, we really talk about moving to a smaller community, getting a new job altogether?
Well, yeah, I think the moment you are in a smaller community or kind of a mid-sized community, I think that the pressures aren't there to drive that far from the core to get something that's more affordable. So it really is a story of the larger cities to find and to make those compromises. And for driving further away, as you pointed out yourself, I'm sure you're paying it through your commute to the core, because you work in the core of Toronto. So it's all a question of compromises.
Yeah, Go Transit gets all my commuting money. Wanted to talk about the first-time home buyer incentive. This is the government solution to say that we're going to help you with a down payment. As people continue to crunch the numbers on this, they're not so optimistic that it's going to make a big difference in the big city. What do our RBC's team have to say about that?
Well, I mean, just to begin, I mean, $1.25 billion over 3 years. I mean, it's not going to be a game changer for the first-time home buyers in Canada. Now we're talking on an annual basis, maybe 2/10 of all of the home being sold in Canada, and compared, for example, in 2018. So it's not a huge program, and I think it's much more targeted towards, I would think, the smaller centers where housing is not quite as expensive, because as the government pointed out or CMHC pointed out when he gave a bit more details a couple of weeks ago, the maximum level of the house that you can buy through that program is I think around $565,000 or somewhere around there, which is not that, it doesn't buy you that much of a family kind of home in Toronto and Vancouver, for example. So I think it will bring a little bit of help for the smaller centers who have been sort of the collateral damage, if you will, of all that policy tightening that we've seen over the last few years.
I feel like some policymakers and observers have thrown in the towel to a certain degree, that have just told a certain generation of Canadians, obviously the younger ones, you know what, you might be a renter for life. I mean, are we really at that point? Do we have to throw in the towel on this idea that these young people would ever get into a house?
Well, I mean, it's, I guess, part of this realization as well that large centers like Toronto are global cities, and you look elsewhere at global peers, and the ownership rate in those cities are much lower than in Toronto, for example. So it might just go with the territory of being a global city that you'll have to there'll be more families, or there'll be renters. But that being said, there's still, I believe, that ways to improve the affordability picture in Toronto and Vancouver through focusing on more supply and kind of family type of housing that's out there that's more affordable than what's out there currently.
Always great to catch up with you, Robert. Thanks for joining us.
It's been a pleasure.
That was Robert Hogue, the senior economist at RBC.